Hello, good morning, everybody, and welcome to the Daily Energy Markets podcast. Uh, I hope you can see me because I'm not sure I can even see myself here. But if you would confirm, there we go. I see Omar and others.
You're sideways, Sean. You need to go
I'm
back to the.
sideways.
Yeah,
Okay.
that's it. That's it.
I'm feeling a bit sideways this morning, but what can you do? Uh, We have, of all strange things happening this morning, Monday, January the 19th, the return of the second half of the Daily Energy Market podcast season. The headlines are screaming in every direction, and yet oil prices, Brent crude oil, dropping a little bit this morning, given all the geopolitical traumas around the world. You might expect that not to be the case. Let's kick off, as always, on Monday morning with Omar Najia, a derivatives trader at BB Energy here in Dubai. Omar, your thoughts just on everything, really, but ultimately, January has kicked off with what I said at the beginning of the month was a year of unknown unknowns. That certainly sort of proved to be the case. These sort of things you've never thought would happen are happening. Oil markets less interested in the dramas of it all. Your thoughts on the intersection point of the news of the day, really, Trump's threats to take over Greenland and the relevance for the international energy markets.
Yeah, no, I don't think Greenland has any effect because the Americans have bases there. They've been quote unquote in the country for I don't know how many years. I think 80 years since the Second World War. So I don't think anything changes. The Europeans made a show of sending like 2 or 3 soldiers each, which they've now. I mean, it's laughable. But
It
I think at the
is.
end,
If it wasn't
yeah,
so serious.
yeah. But at the end of the day, I think we're in a new world where basically, Trump and his administration is saying might is right. Stuff the UN, stuff international law, the rules-based order went out the window. They're kidnapping presidents, they're hijacking vessels on the high seas, they're sanctioning left, right, and center. They're stealing, Russian state funds and all the rest of it. So I think, it's going to be an exciting year for geopolitics. I think it's going to have an effect on oil. But as to Greenland specifically, then no. But Iran looms large, so to speak. The US, they will not negotiate, enrichment. They will not negotiate missiles. And the only question is, can the US accept it? And I think not because of the Israeli influence on Washington. So it's going to be all to play for going forwards.
Let's welcome Pamela Munger, Head of Market Analysis Europe for Vortexa. Pamela, looking at the spaces where the rubber meets the road on this stuff, we're 4 years away from the dawn, or the eve, I should say, of Russia's invasion of Ukraine, which fundamentally changed the energy flow and energy security posture, maybe of many parts of the world, certainly of Europe. Are we at the doorstep of another such moment vis-a-vis Greenland, vis-a-vis European energy security diversification? Because regardless of what happens now going forward on Greenland, the genie's out of the bottle, and can I trust my supplier?
Yes, I mean, I think certainly all of the geopolitical threats, if you will, certainly as Omar mentioned, are taking their toll, and certainly the actions that we saw early this year were a shock to everybody in terms of the U.S. administration, taking Maduro in the middle of the night, and I think that sets the global geopolitical realm up for any possibility. Now, in terms of Russia, what we're starting to see is we're starting to see the financial strain on Russia, I think, bubbling up. It's surfacing. It's kind of making headlines a bit. So, we're starting to really see those Russian barrels be backed up. They continue to load in terms of the crude loading. However, they're really struggling to find homes. They are finding homes in China, and we see that reflected in extreme builds in China's onshore crude inventories. And we continue to see that in the price differentials, right? I mean, China has a race to the bottom in terms of choice of discounted crudes, which is likely why the Venezuela crude taking off the water into China really didn't impact prices very much. However, moving back to Russia, what we could see is this proliferation of the financial side of things, start to hurt Russia. And what will that look like, I suppose, is the next question.
On the point of, obviously, we're not seeing, Pamela, dramatic changes or impacts in the flat price of Brent crude oil as the sort of global benchmark. Are we seeing these developments translate into impacts in other parts of the market? How about tanker rates? I mean, we've got, the reports of the US essentially capturing, I don't know what the word is, stealing, hijacking, taking Venezuela's millions of barrels of oil, selling it, redirecting ships. I'm wondering, are we seeing the impact of these fairly unprecedented developments in other parts of the market?
Yeah, we're certainly seeing, we saw a bounce after the beginning of the year. Of course, we saw that big surge of VLCC rates late last year. And now what we're looking at is a rebound for those particular rates. Okay, largely those were based on the high volume of crude that we saw going from the Americas over to Asia. That has declined, which is partly what's erased some of the oil glut that I know you guys talk about, whether it's there or not, or the question of whether it's there or not. But that's largely, of course, declined. Most of that oil on sea is now made up of the sanctioned barrels from Russia, Iran, and obviously to some extent Venezuela, which is another question. However, we have seen that surge or that increase in those tanker rates as a result of now you need non-sanctioned ballast tankers, of course, moving to go get that Venezuela oil. And then the next question is, it's not an obvious one, where is it going to go? We're starting to see this increase in volumes going into the Caribbean, meaning the non-Venezuelan Caribbean. So Curacao, I think, was just legitimatized as a storage hub. And then, of course, we also have seen volumes going into the Bahamas. This crude is very heavy crude, as I'm sure you guys are very well aware. It needs to be blended. It needs to be in the right kind of storage facilities. Otherwise, it just kind of gungs up, if you will. So it needs to be kind of on the move in the
which ultimately means there isn't endless options for such things. They seem to have got the money part sorted out quickly. Apparently, that's going to a bank account in Doha. Unfortunately, not mine. It seems like a lot of nice money if you can get it, as they say. Omar Al-Obeidly, Director of Research, Bahrain Center for Strategic International Energy Studies. You are close to that bank account, a little closer than most in terms of geographic, at least across the water from Bahrain. But Omar, the other Omar Obeidly mentioned, of course, the other massive story in the recent days and weeks is all things Iran. It seems the sort of big pressure moment has deflated temporarily, perhaps. Your thoughts, Omar Obeidly, on the big story of the latest attempt by the people of Iran to liberate themselves from the sort of Islamic Republic?
Well, I think first of all, it's important to note that there's not much information coming out of Iran at the moment. It's pretty difficult to tell exactly what's going on the ground. You're as aware as I am that what can be garnered from various media narratives can be very misleading.
Yes.
Having said that, what is clear is that there were some pretty bold threats from Donald Trump in the last couple of weeks. And I think it's fair to say that his threats have gained significant credibility after, as Omar mentioned earlier, Venezuela and other sort of kinetic activities, undertaken by the US during the last 6 months. I would definitely caution against thinking that, this issue is over. We're told that Trump's fervent desire to intervene was temporarily, or there was a stay negotiated by his regional partners, asking him to not intervene because it would be destabilizing. However, we know for a fact that Israel has for a long time been demanding some sort of US intervention on that side. And you mentioned, and I think Omar mentioned, the strength of the Israeli influence on decision-making in DC. So while I think that for the next couple of days or weeks, you're right to say that, it seems that there's a deflated risk of US intervention. It wouldn't be the first or the last time that we get a bit of rope-a-dope from Donald Trump, and we'll be surprised with a very strong intervention at a critical juncture. And who knows what's going on behind the scenes in the White House at the moment.
I mean, it does seem, I don't know if one can sort of read the tea leaves on any of this stuff. I mean, putting the Greenland thing aside, but ultimately the other players, the other centers of stress, Ukraine, Gaza, Iran, Venezuela. I think what's most notable about Venezuela, perhaps, is how minimal the sort of the pinprick was. It was essentially an arrest of 2 people, and everything else remains the same. I mean, America's influence has grown. Obviously, it's always been substantial in Latin America, but the idea of don't break it or you own it stress, right? That we saw in Iraq 20 years ago, the great disaster for the world and for the Iraqis in particular, but also for the Americans, Afghanistan, the same. It looks like Trump's unwilling, perhaps even with the election year coming, to really go big in Iran. Your thoughts on that being a restraint on this administration?
Well, I slightly disagree with you on Venezuela. I think although the actual, the extraction itself was very high profile and sort of Hollywood style, undertaking, the reality is that the US has been cranking the pressure up on Venezuela through sanctions, through a quasi blockade of its oil exports, through the attacking and holding its ships and attacking its the boats. So there's been a lot of stuff that perhaps isn't as high profile, but going on in the lead up. And then also the US has been working with the opposition. It hasn't recognized the Venezuela government, I think, for a long time. Has been recognizing the opposition. So maybe, yeah, what we won't see, what we're unlikely to see is sort of Afghanistan/Iraq style, mass deployment of hundreds of thousands of troops. But beyond that, I think more or less everything is open. And I think at the moment, Trump is getting more and more emboldened, as long as he doesn't get into a sort of, Iraq or Afghanistan style quagmire. Decapitation.
That's the kind of, how long's a piece of string thing, isn't it? Once you push over the domino, you don't know what's going to happen. That's ultimately
I think they've demonstrated that with a combination of special forces and what's it called, drones and airstrikes, and then working with partners on the ground, they can go a long way. And cause a lot of disruption. And unlike previous,
they've certainly got a long list of options. But Omar Najia, at the end of the day, this is an oil market with no shortage of oil, and hence Brent sitting comfortably in the low 60s and sort of not really moving, despite the dramas of everything and the possibilities, as Omar highlights. I wouldn't, discount that Iran continues to be a real tension point for the region and for the world. But ultimately, in a moment of time when there's just no shortage of oil around, and so consequently, the price point, the flat price, the market is not going to be reacting. Your thoughts on that moving forward out a month, 2 months, 3 months?
No, I kind of disagree. You have to look at, you can't just start looking at today. like Israel started history on October 7th. If you look back, we were told that there was an armada, a flotilla, a tsunami, a deluge of oil coming, right? You had people saying that we got 3 million barrels a day of overproduction, and then nothing happened. And then they said, no, 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 it's just over the horizon. And then nothing happened. And still nothing's happening. And then they said, you know what? China's going to stop buying for their strategic reserves and any day now. And what does China do? Keep on buying. Then they said storage is full, and they're still buying. And basically, you know, whether I think China's playing a very good game in terms of having a heads up on both Iran and Venezuela, and they will continue to fill their storage. Venezuela, for me, wasn't such a great big thing. I mean, it's very easy to bribe people, and the guy that they bribed has been arrested. Look at what happened in Iran, a total disaster of a failure to do regime change. And like Omar was saying, I think Trump, it's all about deceit and you know, hiding behind stuff and surprising the markets. And anything that he does, he always announces or always does over weekends when markets are closed, because he doesn't want that kind of initial reaction to happen, and he wants to kind of massage the news, etc., etc. So in my view, I think a lot of people are still expecting oil to kind of, you know, go to the downside. I'm not so convinced. You know, oil has had a chance since Q4 and the beginning of this year with the stuff that happened in Venezuela to start moving lower, and it hasn't. So basically, as long as it survives, it's winning. The onus is on the bears to push this market down, and they've failed, but failed miserably. So you've had on WTI 3 or 4 tests of that $55 level. Now, if you look at where production comes in, cost of production, all that kind of stuff, between like 50 to $45 WTI, I mean, everybody's out of the game. Doesn't mean the price can't go down that high, but it's going to rebound very quickly because everybody's going to be screaming. And you have OPEC, OPEC plus, all this kind of stuff. So on a strategic basis, if you look at WTI trading at $55, or let's say Brent trading at 60, it's not such a no-brainer to say, you know what, I'm just going to go short because Trump wants oil at whatever level that he says he wants oil. I'm not so convinced.
Yeah, it does seem, if anything, Pamela, that this is a year where everybody might be a bit like China. You know, fill up the bathtub. Oil security, energy security is really top. I mean, it's been top of the agenda for a while now. If there is a roof above the top, then everybody would think energy security becomes another layer of demand here in an increasingly maybe tighter market than people expect, as Omar has highlighted. That idea of energy security just becomes so elevated that this market gets tighter faster than people think. Your thoughts?
Well, you know what? Well, we certainly have seen the inventories in China, you know, surge. I think our data shows tanks at around 53% utilization. I think there's some different discussions on that. Obviously, the Shandong, the independent refineries, are the ones pulling in. Those inventories are really sky high due to the large amount of sanctioned crude that they import and process. And of course, the new quotas should start to eat into that overhang, but the overhang is quite substantial indeed. So you know, in terms of demand, you know, true demand, what we don't expect to see is a lot of new refinery capacity coming online until sort of the later half of 2026. And where is that coming online? That's mainly in Asia, as you could probably already guess. So you will start to see, you know, with 1 million barrels per day coming online. Of course, refinery startups, as we know, are notoriously a bit slow. That could then absorb more of these barrels. But then you also have supply increases coming, especially out of the Americas, to the tune of around 500,000 barrels per day or so, from between Argentina, Guyana, Brazil, the US. So I think in terms of supply, you have those two things going on, which could help balance sort of those non-sanction crudes.
Just to pushing it a little wider than that, do you think Europe has a diversification play here? I mean, if indeed they're waking up to the realization that all their eggs in the Putin's basket wasn't wise, and one has to be waking up this Monday morning in Europe saying, all my eggs in Trump's basket is not wise. Is there a diversification option for Europe?
Well, Europe, of course, is taking a lot of Libyan crude. It has been taking a lot of the CPC crude as well. So you have those diversification options, at least for the light crude options. So that's definitely the case. Libya has been producing and exporting stable and high amounts for quite some time, and then of course now on the CPC side, that's where you've seen some degradation due to what's happening with the drone attacks, with the units, the loading units there. Europe's best interest, of course, is to diversify. Refineries, though, are sensitive to their crude diet. I know for having worked on kind of that side of things before. So once you get a refinery used to a particular kind of diet, although they have become more flexible, obviously in recent years, you do like to continue on that trajectory. Also, the Brazilian crude has always been a good replacement, obviously, as we know, for Russian Urals as well. So, and that's in strong supply.
Let's go to the survey question here, which is putting forward my little thesis of the weekend, that Trump's Greenland threat is a pressure tactic to get Europe to compromise on agreeing to give up eastern Ukraine to Russia. When you think of the flood the zone with endless noise from endless sources of headlines that the Trump administration generates, from threatening to arrest the Fed chairman to invading Greenland and everything else. Suddenly, the Ukraine-Russia peace agreement or lack thereof has gone away from the headlines. But clearly, Europe is fundamental in supporting Ukraine, whether or not to concede to Russia. Is this a tactic? Is Greenland a tactic in that sort of art of the deal sort of language that Trump espouses, that you up the ante in order to get your concessions? Anyway, this is my thesis, trying to understand what's going on in Greenland. It's a tactic, a distraction from Ukraine. Agree or disagree with this thought? Omar Ubaidli, you mentioned there earlier that regional forces or regional sort of influence got Trump and the administration maybe to curtail an accelerated engagement into Iran. Can you just extrapolate a little bit by that? Because of course there's competing regional influences, isn't there? You mentioned Israel, obviously a massive one for Washington, and then there's the Gulf Arab states and others, even as far away as India. So I'm wondering, when you say Gulf influences, where do you think, who are they, what are they, and who's got the ear here? Who's got the leverage one over the other?
Just very briefly on your poll, I think you may be giving the White administration a little bit too much credit. I think it's more a case of, we like Greenland, we want Greenland. End of story.
I like my Weetabix. Yeah, that's true. That's true.
But yes, going back to your question, so there's multiple things going on in terms of the regional posture. As you mentioned, the Gulf states are the ones that are openly against the idea of Iran as government being collapsed, and obviously the memory of Iraq in 2003 is very fresh, and all the disruption that causes. I would also add to that an important well, they're all focusing at the moment on economic transition. And economic transition is something that requires the region being open for business, And having the region, embroiled in civil and interstate wars is not something that's good for business. And it's something that will direct resources away from economic transition towards maintaining borders and to neutralizing threats from non-state actors. So that's really goes a long way to understanding why the Gulf states and other countries in the region are so firmly against the idea of decapitating the Iranian government. Whereas Israel, on the other hand, as we've seen of late, has a much more direct way of engineering favorable situations. It considers the nuclear threat that it perceives from Iran to be unacceptable, and it's used to basically thumping its fists on the table and getting its way. The 12-day war that we experienced or witnessed in the summer ostensibly has not achieved its desired goals. And the latent threat has always been that if you do not abide by these threats, then we will escalate to the only level above this. And that's really played out literally in Venezuela. So I think that's why I think that despite, as you mentioned at the start, the seeming de-escalation, there's a very strong risk that this situation will flare up. And looming in the background is the fact that Israel's stated goals in 2025 regarding the 12-day war were not achieved. And until those goals are achieved, we will expect a lot more tension and the temperature to increase rather than decrease.
Omar, just quickly going around the room here, Omar Najia, as you look at all of these different fires that are burning, which one of them do you think has the greatest potential of being, and a major impact on supply, where one has to watch a lot closer because of the consequence to supply? Omar and everybody else's views on that.
Iran. So Iran, basically, I agree with what Omar just said. The US administration has achieved none of its goals in any foreign policies that they've started. Russia, failure. Gaza, failure. Anything to do with Iran, failure. Greenland, failure. Venezuela, failure. It's bordering on, they seem to kind of, keep doing this stuff to kind of, the talk is distract from the Epstein files, which was another massive failure. The coming into the midterms, Polymarket says there's an 80% chance that the Republicans lose the House. Failure. There's talk that Pam Bondi is going to be basically pushed out of the administration. So it's
about to be a civil war in Minnesota.
Yeah. And also you've got the Supreme Court ruling on the tariffs, and there's a very high chance that they're going to come in and say illegal, maybe give Trump like 6 months to kind of correct the situation. So every single foreign policy, literally every single one, has ended up in complete failure, which to me is a bullish factor for oil prices, because you're going to need to see more chaos. You're going to need to see more of these kind of, plays for whatever it is, to kind of distract people from what's happening to the US economy. The new Fed share is going to be, beholden to Trump. Again, failure. So it's the increase in spending for
inflation.
Yeah.
Let's give a quick close it out there. I just saw my poll result come in. I pulled 47% of the room to my side. Maybe by the end of the week it'll be 52. Pamela, just the last word to you. I wanted just to get a little bit of granular, or whatever you can share with us, from the point you started out with, that Russian oil exports are backing up their ability to bring oil to market. Obviously, Omar identified Iran as the potential supply disruption space to watch. You're pointing to Russia. Just give us a bit more detail on that if you can.
Yeah, no problem. I do actually agree with Omar in terms of Iran and everything he just said in terms of that's sort of the one that hasn't been caught yet, sort of in a way. So over the years of sanctions, you really haven't seen much degradation to that oil supply flow or process. So in terms of Russia, yeah, we're starting to see a lot of STS, so ship-to-ship transfer locations pop up that haven't existed before. And a lot of these are those Russian barrels that, again, are loading, but are not finding the buyer until they're kind of cruising around, waiting for a little bit, pushing down those discounts even further. So essentially, and then I think I read this morning something about a proposal about dropping that price cap. I mean, it's been below the price cap, but it just shows another move downwards for what's fueling their economy is this energy.
Okay, we're going to have
Just
to
a
wrap it up there.
quick addition,
Yes, please.
Sean. Just very
Yes,
briefly,
please.
the poll
Yes.
should be: is the US playing Hungry Hippos or is it playing chess? And you think it's playing chess? I think it's playing Hungry Hippos.
I don't even know what Hungry Hippos is, but I'll have to look it up. What we didn't mention, and it's it's a half hour. What can we do? But I just will close out by mentioning that the deal done over the weekend, another big moment. Syria central government doing a deal with the Kurdish region, the Kurdish forces in eastern Iraq, eastern Syria, where all of the oil and gas resources are mostly located. That's quite significant for all of those looking to get back into that space, into those concessions, and into the flow of energy out of the region, as well as hopefully a bit of peace and quiet for all the people living on the ground there. Anyway, Brent crude oil trading down this morning despite an avalanche of more Trump headlines over the weekend. It'll be a busy week. Davos is here, of course, for all of those with $1 billion to spare. You can head off to Davos. For the rest of us, it'll be a regular working week. And we'll get on with it. So thank you so much, Omar Bailey, sitting there in Bahrain, Pamela Munger in lovely dark London, I would imagine, probably at this time of the morning still. And thank you for getting up. And of course, Omar Najia at BB Energy here in Dubai. Have a great week, everybody. And thank you for coming back to the Daily Energy Markets podcast. All the best.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you.